Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The other really amazing story that we've heard over the last 12 hours is what happened over in Brazil. So President Luiz Lula underwent emergency brain surgery and is now awake and conscious in the ICU. Apparently, he'll stay in the hospital for about 48 hours. We wanted to get more on this on the ground with Danielle Carvalho, Bloomberg Government reporter. Can you just walk us through the chain of events that has happened and led us here and kind of what this does to the government?
Hey, how are you? Well, Lula, in October, Lula was at home and he fell and hit his head. After that, he was submitted to some exams. He was doing well. But last night, by the end of the day, he started with some headache and he decided to go to the hospital here in Brasilia, the capital. And after some exams, they found there was a hemorrhage and decided to transfer him to São Paulo, where you have a better hospitals there. And he underwent a surgery. In the morning, they announced much more complex surgery, craniotomy. But then at a presser, they explained it was a trepanning, where they use a drain to drain the blood that was between the skull and the brain. And doctors say he is now well. He will spend 48 hours in the intensive care unit, but he will spend the whole week at the hospital just for precaution.
Was there an actual transfer of power to his vice president during this process?
No. Geraldo Alckmin, his vice president, he was in São Paulo. He would have some agendas there, but he traveled back to Brasilia, and he will replace Lula and host in Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who's here today, but as a vice president. So Lula, there was no transfer of power yet.
But nevertheless, when you see these headlines, it does come as quite a shocker. What is the political backdrop, economic backdrop of Brazil right now?
Well, Lula is a 79-year-old man. He will be 81 in 2026 when he intends to run again for president for a fourth term. And what is happening now? What happened in October and what happened today brings us a big question mark on his political future. Will he be able to run for president in 2 years? And age became something very difficult in politics, especially after what happened to Joe Biden in the United States. And there isn't a clear successor for Lula in Brazil. There are some people that brings the name of his finance minister, Fernando Haddad, and actually he is having some lead in the country. 2 weeks ago, he was the star of address on TV to announce a spending cut package to the nation.
All right, Danielle, thanks so much. Thank you so much, Danielle. We appreciate getting your reporting there. Danielle Carvalho, he's a government reporter for Bloomberg News in our Brasilia bureau, which I forgot was the capital of Brazil. I would have just said Sao Paulo or something.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
All right, let's get back to, the other news story that has certainly transfixed, I think, not only New York City, but kind of the country here. And that was that the murder of that senior executive of UnitedHealthcare. And now we have the arrest and charging of the suspect. Michelle Cortez joins us here, Bloomberg Senior Editor, covering healthcare. Michelle, we've seen all the news. We've seen the tape. We now have a murder suspect. How about from the other perspective? How about the perspective of the company? How's the company been reacting to this news? Again, the tragic loss of one of their senior executives. What have we heard from UnitedHealthcare?
Well, it's absolutely been a crisis for the company. It's a crisis not only in terms of the individual person, right? They have lost a senior executive, so a person that many of them were close to. Also, they have a hole for the company that they need to fill, but also there's this huge groundswell of animosity towards the industry, and they have to grapple with that as well. Honestly, what we have heard from the beginning is that they were shocked when this happened. I don't think this was on anyone's bingo card for 2024, and they just didn't know how to react initially when this happened. The first things that we saw was, increased security at the UnitedHealth campuses in Washington and Minneapolis and in New York, and we have seen them taking executives off of their web pages, that type of thing. But in terms of actual communication to the outside world, there's been exceedingly little from UnitedHealth, and even internally, some of the reports that we have seen have essentially downplayed the situation and told employees to not really pay attention to social media, to not take this outpouring to heart. They do have an awful lot of work that's going to have to come. They have not yet done it, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. There's really not an awful lot that they can do at this point, given how much antagonism, animosity, and straight up hatred towards the company from people who have suffered in terms of not being able to get the kind of health care and coverage that they've needed. I think that it's been really shocking for many people.
Which is so surprising, because you would have thought when you have a tragic event like this, it would be the opposite, that you'd see an outpouring of support, right? And that's just not been the case. How has it reflected in UnitedHealth, but also just in other companies as well? Like there was a debacle with Anthem last week and paying anesthesiologists.
Right, absolutely. This is not something that's specific to UnitedHealthcare at all. It is something that comes from the health insurance industry. Obviously, the way these companies operate, they do, when you talk to them about it, what they're doing is they're trying to make healthcare more efficient, more affordable, making it possible for people to get access to the care that they need. But in fact, the way that a lot of them make money is by reducing the expenditures for healthcare insurance. And that, again, not specific to UnitedHealthcare. We've seen other companies dial back their in-person appearances. They've had executives pull back events that were going to be public, that were closed, moved online. Everyone is reevaluating their security at this point, and the way that they move forward at this point is just uncertain. How you can actually rectify something that is systemic to the industry. This is how it operates. So they're going to need to rethink, and how they go forward, I don't think that they know yet. They're still trying to figure that out.
Red headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Saudi's PIF said to near deal to invest in PGA Tour enterprises. So we'll have some more reporting on that for our golf fans out there. And Michelle, I think when this news first broke, we said, the headlines were UnitedHealthcare CEO, but we came to learn later that it was a CEO of a subsidiary, not the overall global CEO. And some people were saying, how could a CEO not have security? But again, he wasn't the CEO of the entire corporation, just of a subsidiary. I guess they have to rethink some of their security for some of their mid-level executives and leadership as well.
Right. Well, so Brian Thompson was the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, yep, which is not UnitedHealth Group, right? It is the insurance subsidiary, which is the biggest of UnitedHealth. If you actually line that up with other S&P companies, it is one of the biggest. It would be independently. It's kind of like, the economy of California or Texas. It's a massive, massive company. He made $10 million a year. I mean, this is not a small, low-level person. It is shocking that he didn't have any kind of security. Many people don't have security. I mean, you can drive up to his house. I used to just live down the road from him in Minneapolis. It is a lovely, lovely home, but certainly not gated, no restrictions around it. And I don't think that people in this industry realized the animosity. And again, no one thought that this could have ever possibly happened. And so, not maybe low-level employees. Certainly, I think everybody who's affiliated with the industry at this point is rethinking their own security, their own, morality, their own, how they're working forward with what they do professionally. But in terms of security, this is an area where everybody is reaching out now. They absolutely have to get this squared away.
Michelle, what could be changes that the industry could take to sort of mitigate this animosity? Like, I'm sure we could list a lot of issues, but what's like a main issue that needs to be really looked at and corrected?
It's such a good question. It really does go to the fundamentals of the industry itself, though. The way that it works is insurance companies put up hurdles to make sure that people are getting the appropriate care and only the care that they need. And sometimes the argument is that they're going too far. And we're seeing these reports coming out on social media, people talking about how they haven't had access to care, how they have been turned down for policies for their kids, their family members, their loved ones. There was a huge outrage about how UnitedHealth particularly was using artificial intelligence to turn down insurance requests, and then they make people and doctors jump through these hoops over and over in order to get access to these kind of, what many people would say arguably are things that should be covered, and it is just part of the process. Now, we could certainly see some type of a reconsideration of that. I don't know that they would want to be doing anything like that in this current moment, right? You don't want to actually respond in any way that might be giving kind of fuel to the fire of the people who are coming out against the industry. So I would imagine, in the weeks and months to come, we might see some kind of a reaction in terms of prior authorizations, in terms of denials, in terms of appeals, in terms of these boards that they have that are set up to actually evaluate whether people should be covered or not. All of those things, I'm sure, are going to be under consideration.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Michelle Cortez, a senior editor covering the healthcare for Bloomberg News, coming to us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. You put up the stock of UnitedHealthcare. UNH is the ticker.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
It was the news that we heard all around the weekend, of course, Assad's fall in Syria, just putting the world in the Middle East into much more chaos. And we wanted to break down sort of what to expect, what some key milestones are to look at with Ned Lazarus, Associate Professor of International Affairs over at George Washington University. What's the TikTok? What's a timeline that you're going to be watching to judge the state of Syria?
Well, Syria is multiple things happening at once. It's been multiple wars within a war. There are things we have to watch. One is the establishment of post-war governance. Are the rebels led by the faction Hayat Tahrir al-Sham able to establish a functioning transitional government? They have nominated a prime minister who was governing their sort of self-administered zone in northwestern Syria before. Mohammed al-Bashir is his name. They have ordered the state offices to continue functioning. They've asked the government to continue working. They have also crucially declared amnesty for regular soldiers of the regime, meaning they're not going to arrest people who were fighters in the Syrian army, in the regime's army. And that's an important declaration of intentions, though they have said that they will absolutely attempt to prosecute leaders, both military and political, who were responsible for the horrific atrocities committed by that regime. That's one area to watch, but there's also a lot of military action continuing in Syria. Israel has undertaken several hundred attacks attempting to destroy essentially the arsenal of the Syrian army. Today, the Israeli Navy and Air Force destroyed the Syrian naval fleet in the port city of Latakia.
Oh.
And chemical weapons facilities, research facilities, weapons storage facilities are being bombed from the air all across the country by the Israelis. There's also another war within a war in Syria, which is in the north, where Turkish forces and Turkish-backed Syrian forces are fighting Kurdish Syrian forces. And that has been going on for a while, but that is also escalating right now. And finally, we have our own deployment of U.S. troops in the desert in sort of central eastern Syria, where they have been stationed for years to try and prevent the reemergence of ISIS. Now, when you have a total breakdown of order like this, that's fertile ground for a group like ISIS to reconstitute, take over territory, et cetera. So the U.S. forces, right now the administration has said we're going to keep them there in order to try and prevent ISIS from reconstituting.
What do you think do we have any indication what the incoming Trump administration, what its policy may be to Syria, given what we've just seen over the last few days?
Well, I guess the best indicator for a Trump policy is his Twitter account, right? Or Truth Social. His post on this issue was that this is none of our, this is not our business and we should stay out. And I imagine that he's aware that we have 900 troops there and that, that ISIS was a problem for us and, probably would be again. But that was his statement on it. Another important dimension, it was Russian forces that Russian and Iranian forces and Hezbollah, of course, that helped Assad, retake power just a few years ago. And Russia had cultivated Syria as its strategic base in the Middle East. It had, ships in the port of Latakia on the Mediterranean and, good amount of air force that stationed in Syria for a time. But the Russian ships are reported to have left the port of Tartus in Syria. So that is another thing to watch, is whether Russia makes an effort to retain its foothold and influence in the country, or whether, because it's so preoccupied with the Ukrainian war, it has it's ready to cede that.
All right. Well, we appreciate that. Thank you very much for the update. Ned Lazarus, Associate Professor of International Affairs at George Washington University. And in the markets, Paul, it's just obviously how do you price geopolitical risk? Like no one had on a bingo card that this was going to happen on the geopol sector. So like how do you price it? And in some ways, many analysts say we've just become very complacent in how we price geopolitical risk. Yeah, and you see that in the oil market, which I know you follow closely. Brent still at $72 a barrel. Didn't really see any major spike here, so we'll keep an eye on that.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We bring you all the top news in business, economic, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. And if we're lucky enough, sometimes we get to tap the amazing C-suite outside of Bloomberg Intelligence and get their take on the real economy and what's happening with their business. We're fortunate enough to have one of them with us right now. So for those of you who don't know, Glencore is a metal behemoth. They basically produce and trade all the metals that everyone needs in daily life, whether you're looking at a transition metal like lithium or something straight up like copper. They also have a recycling business that may be lesser known. They like to recycle end-of-life electronics, lithium-ion batteries, and other critical metal-containing products, which will be key, by the way, in the energy transition as we just run out of the stuff in the ground. So we're lucky to be joined now by Kunal Sinha. He's a global head of recycling over at Glencore. Kunal, thanks for joining us. How has the Glencore recycling business changed over the last sort of few years? Like, where were you guys? Where are you guys now?
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's a less known part of Glencore. I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, it's changed in a few different ways. Increasingly, the recycling, if you think about recycling, traditionally is a very linear sort of value chain activity like everything else used to be. I think it's headed more towards a circularity sort of concept. So we'll still be recycling, but the focus is how do you put those critical metals that you recycle back in the loop into the battery supply chain or the auto supply chain, or copper back into the green manufacturing supply chain. So that's sort of one change. And then the other change is we are pretty substantially present in the copper value chain. We recycle things like end-of-life electronics. We've been doing that since the 80s. We've been recycling lithium-ion batteries for 20 years. I think the other thing that changed is we made a lot of investments in the lithium-ion battery space, especially recognizing the need to recover lithium, the need to handle large battery packs, the need to address the fact that there will be a lot of gigafactories that already are and will be that will produce a lot of scrap. So just keeping an eye on the industry and how it's changing, and hence how our recycling business needs to change to address. And then some of the more near-term recent areas that we are adapting to are recycling of solar panels, recycling of electric motors from electric vehicles. So we're always keeping an eye on the next big pile of post-consumer stuff that comes along, and we'll make sure we stay ahead of the game in terms of getting it and recycling it.
Can you give us a sense of to what extent kind of just industry-wide recycling is impacting the supply of the metals we need and use?
Yeah, I think it varies by metals. If you look at copper, which is a bellwether metal and very heavily talked about, no matter whether you look at the green aspect or energy transition or just simple AI, which will need a whole huge amount of electricity, and hence the grade copper is always in need. If you look at copper, it's roughly a little less than 30 million tons a year of refined supply, 28, 29. Of that, already about 6 to 7 million every year comes from recycled sources. So it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the other metals like nickel, cobalt, lithium, they're not as far along as copper, but there had been a lot of push. So those metals, the recycled portion is coming, especially in cobalt. There's a lot of recycled supply now. So it's a function of how important the metal is, how much post-consumer and post-manufacturing feedstock is on the market to be able to be recycled. Mm-hmm. So copper just benefits from being a very mature and old sort of, if I can call it, metal. Some of the newer metals will get there with time.
Kunal, is recycling for Glencore a profitable business?
Yeah, it's a good question. For us, yes, it's a profitable business. We've shared some numbers in the past. I mean, through the cycle, we make somewhere between 200, 250 million EBITDA contribution from our recycling business, which is recycling a whole bunch of these things. Of course, compared to Glencore's own EBITDA, that's a very small fraction. But if you look at any independent recycling company, I think you'd be hard pressed to find too many with that level of profitability as a pure play recycling company, right?
Any reason to believe that the recycling, trends in the metals business broadly defined, will that change with the new administration coming in, do you believe?
Don't think so. I mean, we've been looking at recycling in North America over the last, 30, 40 years. So we've been through a lot of changes in administration policies, lens. I mean, the good thing about recycling is it's truly an evergreen business. It hits some good policy points on both sides of the aisle. I think if you look at where policy priorities seem to be headed, it's a profitable business. It will create a domestic source of critical minerals. It creates domestic manufacturing jobs. We have discussed the importance of things like semiconductor and electronics manufacturing. They go to national security issues. So there's a lot of tailwinds for recycling that I think would align well with where policymaking is headed in the U.S.
In just 30 seconds, can you tell me what kind of price you might need for copper for recycling to be profitable, and if that's lower than the actual mine cost?
So, funny enough, I mean, the actual copper price doesn't really matter so much. It does matter when you're buying, let's say, very high-grade copper scrap. Mm-hmm. We tend to not do a lot of that. There is this phenomena where when the copper price spikes, there is this notion that some secondary supply will come into the market. And that's just because there's a lot of yards sitting on a lot of material with that price. It's opportunistic to now sell it, right? But it behaves more like copper concentrates, if I can draw a parallel, where it's more the TCs, RCs that matter, not the metal price.
All right, we got to leave it there. Kunal, thanks a lot. Kunal Sinha is Global Head of Recycling over at Glencore.
This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.